and was back in the
Man.
fight 3 weeks later. He was shot in the chest plate 3 times by ISIS in a unilateral strike, that they ended up winning. That's the kind of guy that almost every one of these commandos, special forces, KKA, were and are. And the level of trust and loyalty and love between them and their American advisors, that was one of the hardest things to write in this book, was to put it into words. All you're really doing is you're shifting the moral responsibility onto the backs of veterans.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting.
And these are men and women who've already given plenty.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna say no. And that's, to me, like, how could you do that?
Why do you think they're amassing in Afghanistan from all these other countries?
Well, it's the perfect safe haven. If you're going to have a global terror threat projection, if you're going to fulfill on that narrative of bringing unprecedented violence to the West like you saw on 9/11, 2001, you have to have a safe haven that gives you the ability in an unfettered, uninterrupted way to plan, prepare, project, train, and refit. And Afghanistan is the ultimate safe haven in that regard, because their government is an Islamist government. They have a soft spot in their heart for anything that is anti-American, that is terrorist in nature. They support it, and they're showing that openly right now. Now, even though we have a Doha agreement that says if you do that, we're coming back in, that what we're seeing from this administration is no indication that that will happen. It's just grilled into you. And our operators for decades worked off that. I have your back. And it was just understood. So if a commando unit went in on a mission, there were SF guys right there at their shoulder. If the KKA went in on a mission, there were Rangers or SEALs right there at their shoulder. Like, it was just understood. And then all of a sudden, really under 2 political administrations, this desire to just get out of the country, to get out of the war, completely dismissed these deep relationships that were in place, and frankly, that we bled for 20 years, so that we didn't have another 9/11, so that we wouldn't have to rely on the over-the-horizon attacks that failed so miserably to prevent 9/11. We had built this ground intel network. We had built these phenomenal partners. Now, granted, the larger Afghan army and the police raft with corruption. You're going to live next to me. We're going to be neighbors. I remember saying that.
You said that.
I did, because I needed to say something that would just give him some kind of hope. But then and he kind of laughed. He has this hyena-like laugh, this little high-pitched laugh, and he's like, "Okay, sir." And we hung up the phone, and I just looked at my wife, and I was like, "What did I just do?" I just made him a promise that I don't know if I can keep it. And my wife said, "You'll keep it. You'll figure it out."
She backed you.
Oh, 100%. And we had tried so hard to put the war behind us with our play and everything else that we had done. I didn't want to get involved in this thing. I really didn't. But at that point, I knew I was in, and I was in pretty deep. We were putting together this plan for Nizam, and Mike called me. And he said, "Scott, he's got to go now." And I was like, "What? Dude, we don't even have a plan yet. Like, he's going to burn his safe house. It's broad daylight." And Mike said, "I've got a feeling, man. I'm watching the news. I'm watching how things are falling. The Taliban are actually going to be security partners with the Neo forces. Like, if we don't get him in on the inside of that Taliban ring, they're going to check his credentials and he's dead. He's got to go now." I was like, fuck. we didn't have a full plan. We didn't have a way for him to get in. All we had really was a way to get him to the edges of the airfield. And then we were going to have to figure out the rest as we went. And that was when it was like,
shit.
And he was texting me on Signal, which is how we communicated. And we would talk on the phone some on Signal. And he was saying, something's really wrong. You know, by this time, the Biden administration was in charge. They were pretty much executing President Trump's Doha agreement. And that excluded the Afghan government completely, that deal. So the Afghan government wasn't even in. So what do you think they're doing?
What was that deal?
So the deal basically was a set of terms between the United States and the Taliban.
Okay.
Right. So this assumption that the Taliban are going to take over, but there were conditions that had to be met. Right. And if they didn't meet those conditions, then we'd go back in or whatever. But President Biden's administration pretty much took that same deal and just went full bore. But the Afghan government was not included in the deal. So, you know, they're doing all of the self-preservation things that you would think that an already corrupt government was doing. What would actually happen in the country, and all of those villagers we had worked with were being hunted, or a lot of them, and killed. So I left, and I pursued another direction in my life outside of special ops, and I really had no interest in Afghanistan again, other than just moving on.
What was that initial phone call like with
Nizam?
Yeah.
I think for me, the phone call that really got me was after the collapse, you know. And I don't really watch 24-hour news, but I was watching it because my buddy called me, Steve, who I served with in 7th Group, and he was like, "Turn the news on, man." So I turn it on, and there's the Taliban, you know, strutting around Kabul in our gear, our kit, our M4s with optics, driving our vehicles, Afghan vehicles that we had given to them. I mean, it was the most devastating, it was humiliating to watch that. Right? They may get decimated and experience degradation like what happened with the 20-year war in Afghanistan and the ISIS campaign in Syria, but they do not lose the focus on their narrative, and they are very patient and very committed. What you're seeing right now in Afghanistan is a complete return to where we were pre-9/11. And I'm getting this firsthand from former Afghan special operators who fought Al-Qaeda and ISIS for years. Also from Legend, the Afghan-American intel NCO from our Army who's been in country reporting as well. They're all saying the same thing. Al-Qaeda, Lieutenant General Sami Sadat, the last commander of Afghan special operations before the country fell. I've had conversations with him. He's getting ready to go back into the country and try to mobilize the commandos as part of the resistance.